Hey, so I'm Ava. I live a pretty quiet life in a small city, working as an archivist, basically. I spend my days surrounded by history, old papers, and memories of people long gone. My evenings, usually just a good book and a cup of tea, pretty peaceful, right? Well, that all changed with a final, unexpected gift from my uncle. And let's just say it revealed sides of my parents I never knew. By the way, I'd love to hear where are you watching from and what time is it there? It was a Tuesday so gray, so utterly ordinary that I barely remembered it until that call. My phone rang, and when I answered, there was this calm, measured voice on the other end, Miss Evelyn Reed. She introduced herself as my Uncle Ben's lawyer, smooth, professional, and somber, like someone trained to deliver bad news without making it sting too much. And, oh, it stung anyway. She told me, gently, that Uncle Ben had passed away peacefully in his sleep a couple of nights ago. I remember my knees weakening, my heart lurching, and this strange vertigo, like the floor had fallen out beneath me. Uncle Ben, my uncle, the man who had always been more of a father than my own dad ever was. The one who had taught me how to skip stones across the ocean, who had laughed so loudly and warmly that his voice was like a soundtrack to my childhood, echoing through the summers of my youth. He had been my hero, my rock, my safe place in a sometimes chaotic world. And now he was gone. I couldn't breathe. Tears blurred my vision, and for a moment, everything else, the city outside, the phone in my hand, vanished. All that existed was the silence of his absence and the echo of his laughter in my memory. Miss Reed's voice continued, steady and professional, but threaded with an unmistakable tenderness. She spoke of the funeral, how it would be a small, private affair in keeping with his wishes, and then she mentioned the will. My uncle had left me something significant. She asked if I could come by her office on Friday to discuss the details. Significant, I barely registered the word. Significant. The thought hovered in the air, almost absurd against the weight of my grief. What could be more significant than the man himself? Who was now gone, I mumbled my agreement, my voice barely a whisper, and the rest of her words faded into a meaningless hum. When I finally told my parents, I noticed it immediately, the flicker of curiosity, the glint of something far from grief in their eyes. My mother, Elina, always polished, always precise, offered a clipped sentence of condolence before her thoughts darted immediately to finances. Did he mention his finances? He was always so private, she asked, like she was reading a ledger rather than reacting to the death of her own brother. My father, Robert, nodded along, his expression unreadable but sharp, like he was already calculating something, seeing opportunity where the rest of us just saw loss. My skin crawled under their gaze, and I muttered that I didn't know, that I was still grieving, and I retreated into myself, the weight of the conversation pressing down. Friday arrived, and I found myself in Miss Reed's office, sitting across from her in a leather chair that somehow felt both formal and comforting. Her office was immaculate, every detail in place, and the view of the city harbor beyond reminded me of Ben. He would have loved it. Loved how the water stretched to the horizon, endless and unchanging. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and unflappable. But when she handed me a tissue before even beginning, there was a warmth, a subtle acknowledgement of my grief that made my throat tighten. She spoke carefully, her voice softening as she talked about Ben's admiration for me, my quiet strength, my independence. And then she slid a large familybetrayal folder across the desk. The words hit me like a wave. Ben had left me his entire residual estate, portfolio, savings, and his beloved beach house perched on the Atlantic bluff. My chest tightened, my hands froze. The beach house wasn't just a building, It was every summer I'd ever spent laughing with him, every story, every moment shared under that endless sky. The smell of salt and pine embedded in the walls, the half-finished crossword on the coffee table, the photograph of me as a 10-year-old grinning with a missing front tooth, it was all there. All part of him. Priceless. Yes, but real estate was a different kind of reality. Ms. Reed mentioned the value, and my head spun. $1.5 million. It was stunning, almost surreal. And then the weight of the rest of it hit me: the deed transfer, the probate, the legalities. I was the sole heir. My parents weren't mentioned in the will, except for a small sum left to my mother. Ben had been explicit. I was to be the sole beneficiary of his life's work. It wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration, a statement of trust, of belief in me. Sitting there, holding that folder, absorbing the enormity of what had just happened, I felt a flood of grief and gratitude, awe and disbelief. This was my uncle's final gift, and it was more than material. It was a bond, a legacy, a love that had transcended even death. I called my parents that evening, the phone trembling slightly in my hand. I could still feel the echo of Miss Reed's words, the weight of the folder on my lap, and my chest felt impossibly tight. When I told them about the inheritance, there was a shift. Something subtle, almost invisible at first, but I noticed it immediately. Their eyes changed, this glint that made my skin crawl, and I realized it wasn't grief they were feeling, it was calculation. Alina, my mother, offered a few clipped words of sympathy, the kind that barely skimmed the surface. Then, almost immediately, she asked, did he leave any details about his finances? You know, Ben was always so private. Her tone was polite, but it had an edge, a precision, like a scalpel cutting through a soft tissue. She wasn't just asking, she was probing, testing. My father nodded along, his expression neutral, but there was that same glint, eyes narrowing, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakable to me. Robert, financial advisor extraordinaire, was already seeing the numbers, seeing what could be gained. I mumbled something about not knowing, barely able to articulate that I was still grieving. My voice sounded foreign to me, small and swallowed by the tension of their presence. I didn't mention the house yet. I wasn't ready for their reactions. And then, a few days later, they arrived. I remember the moment vividly. My father's polished sedan rolled up the driveway. Alina perched like some carefully arranged accessory beside him, magazines in hand, hair immaculate, and that faint smile playing at the edges of her lips. It was supposed to be helpful, supportive, maternal. But I knew this was different. This was reconnaissance. As they stepped inside, my stomach sank. Elena's eyes darted over every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every photograph. Her lips pursed, her eyebrows arching with unspoken judgments. "Oh, darling, this place has so much potential," she began, sweeping a critical eye over Ben's furniture, which was comfortable, slightly worn, perfectly lived in. "But it's so dated. We'll need to open up this wall, get some modern pieces in here. A lighter color palette would do wonders." She moved around the living room as if she owned it, gesturing toward things I had loved, rearranging them with her eyes, if not her hands. I tried to mask my disbelief, swallowing hard, my hands gripping the edges of my chair. My father, meanwhile, was doing his own silent survey. He walked the bluff like it was a property inspection, rather than a home my uncle had poured his heart into. He tapped the railing, squinting at the ocean, murmuring under his breath about zoning restrictions, resale value, and the necessity of an independent appraisal. Every word was carefully measured, every note designed to unsettle me. It wasn't concern, it was calculation. and the realization hit me like cold water. They weren't here to help me. They were here to stake a claim. Over the next 2 days, the intrusion became relentless. My mother moved furniture around, creating little piles of things she deemed cluttered or ugly. It wasn't just aesthetic judgment, it was a subtle erasure of Ben's presence, a mapping of territory in someone else's home, a hand-carved decoy duck he'd cherished. Pushed aside, a collection of sea glass we'd gathered together, tucked into an unassuming corner. Each tiny act was a jab, a quiet undermining, and I caught myself moving things back when she wasn't looking, my heart aching with a mix of grief and anger. My father was no less invasive. He tried to sit me down for a financial planning session, his voice smooth and reassuring, as if the financial empire he imagined for me was the only reality. Charts, printouts, investment strategies. I was drowning in numbers while my heart ached with the memory of my uncle. The smartest play here, Ava, he said, leaning over the spread of papers, would be to liquidate, sell the house, invest the proceeds in a diversified portfolio under my management. You'd be set for life. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I stared at him, incredulous, my voice finally firm despite the tremor I felt inside. I'm not selling. Uncle Ben wanted me to live here. This is my home. There was a pause, a theatrical sigh that seemed to fill the room. You're being emotional. Sweetheart, he said. This is a financial asset, a massive one. You can't think of it like a childhood dollhouse. The condescension pressed down on me, suffocating. It was everything I'd feared my grief weaponized. My uncle's gift reduced to numbers and potential profit. They weren't seeing me. They weren't seeing Ben. They were seeing the house as a prize, a jackpot, a commodity. I felt the walls closing in, anxiety knotting my stomach. The more I asserted my decisions, the more they pressed, testing, probing. And then came the Sunday evening escalation. I was in the kitchen making tea when Alina appeared with a brochure for a luxury downtown condo. I was just thinking, she said, all lightness and cheer. This house is so big for just one person. You'd be more comfortable in a place like this. All the amenities, none of the upkeep. We could sell this, get you a condo, and there'd be plenty left over for your father and me. Of course, managing your future. I froze, my voice colder than I intended. Managing my future. You mean? Her smile tightened. No warmth left, replaced with a sharp edge. Don't be difficult. Ava, we're your parents. We know what's best. My heart raced, dread pooling in my chest. They weren't suggesting, they were declaring, trying to rewrite the narrative of my grief, my inheritance, my life. In that moment, I saw them not as my parents, not as the people who had raised me, but as strangers with a singular obsession. They had looked at this incredible gift, this sanctuary that held decades of memories and love, and all they saw was potential profit, a stepping stone for their ambitions. The poison in their welcome was no longer subtle, it was tangible, thickening the air between us. I set my mug down with a deliberate clatter, my voice steady, though my chest felt heavy. The only burden here is this conversation. The house is mine. It's not for sale, and it's not going to be managed by either of you. This discussion is over. I met their eyes, cold and unwavering. The masks of concern dropped, replaced by fury, shock, and disbelief. They had expected tears, panic, indecision. They had expected to bend me, but instead, they met quiet resolve. They left shortly after, their movements sharp, clipped, a silent retreat that carried no grace. The coldness of their departure left a heaviness in the house, but also a strange clarity. The stage had been set, the intentions revealed, the intrusion was clear, and my anxiety, while intense, had a focus now. This wasn't just a house. This was Ben's legacy, and I would protect it, even from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The days that followed were exhausting. Every conversation with my parents felt like walking a tightrope over a pit I didn't even know existed. They were relentless, subtle in the beginning, like a slow drip wearing away at my composure, and then increasingly bold, testing boundaries I hadn't even realized were under scrutiny. Alina started with the furniture. Of course, nothing was safe. Ben's favorite armchair, angled perfectly toward the ocean view, suddenly became outdated, a relic in desperate need of replacement. She would sweep through the living room, her eyes scanning every surface, muttering critiques with that soft, practiced air of concern. "Oh, this wall," she said one afternoon, tapping at the slightly worn paneling. "We could open it up. Maybe a lighter color here, something brighter. Wouldn't that make it feel more modern?" Her voice was airy, almost cheerful, but every word was calculated. It wasn't about helping me feel at home, it was about remodeling, rearranging, redefining the space according to her tastes, her vision. My father, meanwhile, transformed the house into a ledger of possibilities, numbers stretching out in his mind as though the ocean itself were a spreadsheet. "You realize the capital gains tax could be substantial," he said one evening, flipping through a stack of papers with clinical efficiency. "And property management costs, upkeep, insurance. You'd be set for life if you just liquidated. I could handle it all for you, minimize your risk." He leaned in, smooth, confident, voice low but commanding. "It's a smart play. Ava, really, you wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I wanted to scream. The house wasn't a plaything, a portfolio, or a potential cash prize. It was Ben's life, his love, the essence of summers, laughter, and quiet moments that were etched into every wall. But trying to explain that felt futile, like shouting into a storm of numbers and glossed over decor magazines. I felt my stomach twist, my chest tighten, and still, I tried to maintain calm. "I'm not selling," I said firmly, almost whispering it like a mantra to keep my own voice steady. "This is my home. Uncle Ben wanted me to live here. I'm staying." Their reaction was as predictable as it was infuriating. My father sighed theatrically, the sound filling the room with condescension. "You're being emotional. Sweetheart, this isn't about emotion. It's a massive asset. You can't think about it like some childhood dollhouse. You need to be rational, logical, rational, logical." I wanted to laugh. Bitterly. "Rational," he said, as if the feelings of a grieving niece, as if the memories of a beloved uncle, as if the house itself could be dismissed with a wave of spreadsheet logic. And Alina was relentless. She'd circle back to the design. "Darling, these curtains are heavy. The walls are dark. It makes the space feel smaller. I know Ben loved it this way, but for you, for your future, we could brighten it up, open it, modernize. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the armchair that had belonged to him, that had held our conversations, our laughter. Modernize, change the past, erase the presence of the man I loved. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. "No," I said softly but firmly. "We are not changing it. Not now. Not ever." They didn't stop. Each day brought a new angle, a new way to unsettle me. Financial planning meetings disguised as casual chats, discussions about potential buyers, comments about maintenance costs, as if I couldn't handle it. "You know, Ava, a smaller place would make life easier," my mother said one morning, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Less cleaning, less upkeep, more time for yourself. And we could make it profitable. Think of the legacy you could leave with the proceeds." Her smile was almost kind, but I could feel the manipulation behind it. Every sentence was a soft shove toward surrender. One afternoon, my father brought out charts, Detailed graphs showing potential investment growth if I sold the house, diversified the proceeds, and let him manage the portfolio. He leaned over the kitchen island, pointing at columns and numbers with the precision of a surgeon. See here, conservative estimates, optimistic scenarios. You could retire early, travel, never worry about finances again. Isn't that what you want? I felt the burn of tears threatening, the frustration and grief twisting together in a tight knot. I don't want that, I said, shaking my head. I want the house. I want Ben's home. This isn't about money. The tension escalated further when they began suggesting alternate living arrangements, luxury condos, smaller coastal homes, anything that would strip me from the beach house, remove me from the sanctuary I had only just inherited. Alina's tone was light, teasing even, but her words cut like knives. This house is so big for one person. You'd be happier elsewhere. I promise. No maintenance, modern amenities, perfect location. My voice turned cold, sharper than I intended. It's mine. It's not for sale. I will not leave. The room went silent, a heavy pause that carried everything they hadn't expected. I saw the surprise flicker in their eyes, the confusion, even a hint of irritation. They had anticipated resistance. Yes, but not this level of unwavering determination. I stood, hands pressed to the counter, taking in the familiar scent of the sea that drifted through the open windows. I could feel Ben's presence in every beam, every breeze, every echo of laughter from summers past. The house was his, and he had given it to me. It wasn't theirs to manipulate, to profit from, or to control. Alina's face tightened, the warmth vanishing, replaced with a flash of fury that I had seen before, but never aimed at me with such raw intensity. My father's voice lowered, measured, a last attempt at persuasion. Ava, we're just trying to help you think logically. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. But his tone was powerless now, the edge of entitlement blunted by my refusal to bend. I felt a shift inside me, a slow solidification of resolve. No, this conversation is over. The house is mine. And I will not discuss selling it again, not with either of you. End of discussion. My voice was steady, final. The calm in me belied the storm of emotions. I had weathered the grief, the disbelief, the anger. But it was the only way to stand, to hold the line. They had tested the waters, probed for weaknesses, and found none. As they finally retreated, their steps sharp and cold, leaving behind only the faint echo of their presence, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The intrusion had been revealed, their intentions clear, and my position unshakable. I sat back down, chest heaving, and looked out over the waves. The house wasn't just a building or an inheritance. It was Ben. It was memory. It was life. And no amount of critique, manipulation, or financial argument could change that. I was determined, now more than ever, to protect it. After that first wave of pressure from my parents, I realized I couldn't rely on hope or good intentions anymore. This wasn't just grief. They were strategic, calculating, and they'd already shown exactly what they were capable of. I knew I had to get ahead of them, to protect not just the house, but the legacy my uncle had entrusted to me. And that's when Miss Reed reminded me of the letter Ben had left, a final, hidden safeguard meant for moments exactly like this. I remember reading it with my hands shaking, feeling both awe and a rush of clarity. Ben had anticipated their greed, their moral flexibility, and he'd given me instructions to protect myself. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a roadmap, and at the heart of it was an irrevocable trust, a legal entity that would make the house untouchable. My parents couldn't touch it, couldn't claim it, couldn't even try to manipulate me around it. The trust would own the house, and I would be both the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary, essentially. Ava Thompson, the person, would no longer legally own the house. My namesake trust would, and that meant anyone attempting to transfer the deed or sell the property without my approval would be trying to take something that wasn't theirs to begin with. Bulletproof, ironclad. The concept felt almost cinematic, the kind of clever, almost audacious move I could hardly believe had been laid out for me. I sat there, staring at the letter, the instructions carefully penned by a man who knew me, who had lived through the very dynamics I was navigating. It wasn't just a tool, it was reassurance, a form of guidance from someone who had always seen more clearly than I had in my younger years. And in that moment, my panic receded, replaced by a focused, icy calm. I had a plan, and it was a good one. I started mapping out the steps, every action deliberate, every detail accounted for. Miss Reed was incredible, methodical, precise, the kind of legal professional who could execute the plan flawlessly together. We went through the paperwork, the transfers, the signatures, each step adding another layer of security. Signing the documents felt surreal, a mountain of forms, dense with legal terminology, each one a brick in a wall I was building around myself in the house. But with every signature, every notarized page, I felt the anxiety ease. I was reclaiming control in a way I hadn't imagined possible. Emotionally, it was intense. There was a thrill, yes, but also a lingering grief for my uncle, a recognition of how much he had done for me from beyond the grave. And yet, beneath that grief, there was satisfaction. I was prepared now, ready for whatever my parents might try. The trust wasn't just a legal shield, it was a statement. I wasn't naive, I wasn't vulnerable, I was aware, alert, and protected. The house was no longer merely a gift, it was a fortress, constructed with care and foresight. I remember walking through the rooms after all the documents were filed, feeling a strange mixture of relief and tension. Relief because I knew my home was secure, tension because I could almost sense my parents scheming, plotting, imagining their next move. But that didn't matter anymore. They couldn't touch it, they couldn't manipulate it, they couldn't force me into a corner. And that knowledge, that legal certainty, gave me a strange, powerful calm. It wasn't arrogance, it was preparedness. I had turned a situation that could have left me powerless into one where I held every advantage. I could see them in my mind, imagining attempts to sway me, and I knew they would find themselves thwarted at every turn. The house, Ben's final gift, was protected, and I was ready. Every future confrontation would be on my terms. Every attempt to manipulate me neutralized by the meticulous planning that Ben, Miss Reed, and I had put into place. Sitting there, watching the waves crash against the bluff, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had transformed fear into strategy, grief into resolve. The irrevocable trust was more than a legal instrument, it was peace of mind, a shield, a guarantee that Ben's legacy and my own choices would remain intact. And in that moment, I finally felt the clarity to see the path ahead. They could come, they could try, but nothing could break the walls we had built around this house. Not now, not ever. By Thursday, the plan was clear. I had the trust in place, the legal groundwork laid, and yet I knew my parents would never back down. They were already imagining their victory. So I had to give them something to bite on, something to make them think they were winning. That's when the idea hit me. I would stage a surrender, make the house look like I was leaving, pack boxes in plain sight, and let them think their scheme was working. I went to the local store first, buying a stack of cardboard moving boxes, packing tape, and markers. Even the act of carrying them back up the long driveway made my heart race, not out of fear, but anticipation. I could already imagine their faces when they saw the stacks of boxes. It was a quiet thrill, almost mischievous. Knowing I was setting the stage for their overconfidence, I started with the living room. Books from the shelves were carefully packed, labeled in neat, visible handwriting, as if I had no intention of keeping them, even though I would. The half-finished crossword from Ben's coffee table went into a box. The photograph of me as a 10-year-old carefully wrapped in tissue. Every move was deliberate, visible from the windows. I wanted them to think that by Friday, I'd be gone, and the house would be theirs to manipulate. In the kitchen, I stacked a few dishes in boxes on the counter, leaving some out carelessly to sell the illusion of a partial, haphazard packing job. It wasn't about deception for its own sake. It was about theater, a play, really. And I was the director. I walked around, rearranging items slightly, leaving enough to suggest abandonment, but keeping the heart of the house intact. Every step was calculated, each gesture designed to lull them into complacency. As I worked, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and guilt. It was almost like sneaking candy as a kid. This little thrill of bending the rules without actually breaking them. I paused often, taking deep breaths, letting the sound of the ocean crash against the bluff soothe me. Ben's spirit seemed to watch over me, the memories of summers past threading through the air, grounding me. I left the curtains open, letting the natural light flood the rooms and illuminate the stacks of boxes. I imagined my parents driving up the driveway, spotting the apparent chaos, nodding to each other with smug satisfaction. It made me smile, a small lift at the corners of my mouth as I carried a box toward the front door, setting it deliberately by the entrance. Each step, each placement was a brushstroke in a scene I had choreographed for them. Even the way I packed mattered. Papers were neatly stacked, labeled, but clearly out of order in terms of daily use. It suggested a hurried, almost careless departure. Ben's collection of sea glass was tucked into a box that looked temporary, as if I didn't care about its value, its history. I could practically see my mother's eyes narrowing, her mind racing with visions of redesigns and new furniture, while my father mentally calculated profits and losses. And they would take the bait of that, I had no doubt. By evening, the house looked half-packed, abandoned, ready for a supposed exodus, but I had preserved the soul of the place, the memories tucked safely in boxes, the room still alive with Ben's presence. I stood on the deck for a moment, looking out over the ocean, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. It was a quiet, secret joy, knowing that my parents were about to walk into a scene designed entirely by me, and all their assumptions about control and power were about to be shattered. I went through the house one more time, walking slowly, checking each stack of boxes, adjusting a book here, a photograph there. Every movement was deliberate, calm, measured. I paused in the living room, my hands on the back of Ben's armchair, breathing in the familiar scent of the ocean breeze and old cedar. This was home. They wouldn't take it. And yet, the suspense, the anticipation of Friday was electric. I could almost hear them approaching, their arrogance in full bloom, oblivious to the trap waiting for them. By the time night fell, I felt a mixture of fatigue and exhilaration. The house was set, the illusion complete. Every box, every staged sign of departure was a silent signal. Come, step into your victory, but don't expect it to hold. I went to bed with a fluttering heart, a strange grin, and the comforting knowledge that the next act, the confrontation, would play exactly as I had envisioned it. My preparation wasn't just legal, it was theatrical, strategic, and most importantly, entirely under my control. Friday arrived, and with it, a tension so thick I could practically feel it pressing down on my shoulders. The house looked perfect for the illusion stacks of boxes in every room, curtains drawn to show half-packed rooms, a somber air hanging in the air like a fog. I had walked through it all morning, double-checking placements, adjusting angles, making sure every visible detail screamed departure. It was theater, yes, but it was my theater, and this was the final act. At precisely 2:45 p.m., I spotted the sleek black SUV rounding the bend in the driveway. My heart stuttered not with fear, but with anticipation. Miss Evelyn Reed stepped out first, her navy suit tailored, leather portfolio in hand, radiating calm authority. She moved with a deliberate grace, a quiet presence that immediately drew the eye. I felt a wave of reassurance. She was here. Everything we had prepared would unfold exactly as planned. A few moments later, another car arrived, a more modest sedan, and out stepped my parents. Beaming with that all too familiar smug confidence, Alina, immaculate as ever, stepped lightly, like she was gliding onto a stage. My father followed, folders tucked under his arm, projecting an air of business-like control. And behind them, the Millers. Our unsuspecting prospective buyers looked around the property with wide-eyed curiosity, oblivious to the storm about to erupt around them. My stomach twisted, but in a good way, the thrill of what was about to happen surged through me. They walked up the path, and through the large picture window, I could see my mother catch sight of the stacked boxes. A satisfied smirk spread across her face, small and cruel, like a cat who had cornered a mouse. She turned to the Millers, gesturing grandly toward the house. "Ah, yes, these are the Millers," she said, with a little too much cheer. "They're very interested in the property. We were just telling them about our vision for the place." The Millers smiled politely, clearly charmed by her performance, and I felt a flicker of amusement. They had no idea what was coming. My father stepped forward, all business, all confidence. "We'll just need the keys from you before we start the official walkthrough. The agent will be here in an hour to finalize the listing," he said, expectant. His hand was outstretched, ready for the surrender I had meticulously staged. And I didn't move. I looked past him toward the hallway, where Miss Reed was still standing quietly, perfectly poised. I held my breath, the seconds stretching, the suspense tangible. Then, as if on cue, Miss Reed emerged from the shadows of the hallway and stepped into the sunlight-filled living room. Every eye snapped toward her. She moved with deliberate calm, each step measured, each movement commanding attention. The portfolio under her arm was a subtle signal she was here not just to observe, but to act. I watched my parents freeze, their smiles faltering, confusion flickering across their faces. "Who are you?" my father demanded, his voice losing some of its confident swagger. He took a step toward her, but she didn't even glance at him. Instead, she offered a professional, reassuring smile to the Millers. "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am legal counsel for the owner of this property." The words hit like a hammer, precise and heavy. "This property is not for sale." There was a beat of silence. My mother's lips parted, a high-pitched gasp escaping her before she could regain composure. "Of course it's for sale." "We are the owners," she snapped, voice rising, shrill, full of indignation. "But Ms. Reed didn't flinch. She opened her portfolio and produced a document with a calm flourish. "Ah, yes," she said, voice low and sharp. "The deed you filed to transfer ownership to yourselves. May I see it?" My father fumbled, but eventually handed over a folder, the weight of realization already settling in his shoulders. Ms. Reed held it up, comparing it with her copy. Her eyes, cold and precise, scanned the paperwork. "This document is fraudulent," she stated plainly, each word cutting through the air like a knife. At the time you attempted to transfer ownership, my client, Ava Thompson, was no longer the legal owner. Ownership had already been transferred to the Ava Thompson Trust, an irrevocable legal entity. She is the sole trustee. Your deed is null and void. I watched them unravel. My father went pale, the color draining from his face, and his confident posture crumpled. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, her previous smirk evaporating into disbelief. The Millers' faces mirrored shock and confusion. They were suddenly acutely aware they had been misled. I could see my mother's hands tremble, the mascara on her cheeks streaked, her carefully maintained composure gone. Ms. Reed didn't stop there. She turned back to the Millers, addressing them with quiet authority. You have been brought here under false pretenses. Any business dealings with these two individuals regarding this property would constitute fraud. The Millers nodded rapidly, clearly horrified, and without a word, they retreated, practically fleeing toward their car. The scene had shifted entirely. My parents were left standing in the living room, stripped of authority, their entire scheme laid bare. My father's eyes darted, searching, desperate, and my mother's face contorted in a mix of rage and panic. I kept my gaze steady, calm. Though inside my heart was hammering, I was exhilarated. Yes, but it was tempered by a strange calm, a realization that the trap had worked perfectly. You tricked us, my mother whispered, voice trembling with fury. You little snake, you tried to steal my home. I shook my head slowly, letting my voice carry the weight of quiet certainty. You tried to steal my uncle's final gift. I just protected it. There was no heat, no trembling, just firm truth. Ms. Reed snapped her portfolio shut, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. The crime you have committed is fraudulent conveyance, she said, voice like steel. It carries severe penalties, including fines and potential prison time. You knowingly filed a falsified legal document with the intent to deprive the rightful owner. The gravity of her words hung in the air, tangible and suffocating. They stood there, frozen. The arrogance and entitlement that had fueled their attempts now reduced to disbelief and fear. Ms. Reed pressed forward, producing another set of documents and a pen. You have two options, she said, cold, merciless, and precise. Option 1, I walk out, report this to the district attorney, and ensure you face the full legal consequences. Option 2, you sign this agreement, admitting your claim is based on false pretenses, relinquishing all claims to this property, and agreeing to a permanent restraining order. I watched my parents' faces, the rapid calculation, the weighing of pride against their livelihoods, their freedom. My father's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. My mother's sobs were quiet, pathetic, and I felt nothing. The well of emotions I had carried for them had dried up, leaving only resolve. With shaking hands, my father signed. Then my mother, tears streaking her face, followed. Miss Reed collected the documents, and the finality of the moment settled in. They had been stripped bare, their power dismantled with 2 pieces of paper, and I had watched it unfold without lifting a finger. I was still Ava, still myself, but stronger, armed with clarity and justice. The moment they left, I locked the door and leaned against it, the silence of the house rushing in to fill the void they left. I was alone. Yes, but free. The confrontation, the tension, the threat all gone. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like a sanctuary again. I began to unpack, to reclaim the space, restoring Ben's books, his collections, his memories. The battle had been brutal, but the victory was mine, quiet, complete, and, above all, real. After the chaos of Friday, the house was finally quiet. The silence was almost shocking, like the world had shifted overnight. My parents were gone, their scheme fully exposed, and for the first time, the space around me felt mine in every sense. I walked through the room slowly, letting the emptiness sink in, breathing in the familiar scent of the ocean breeze mixing with cedar and soot. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was Ben's legacy, and it was safe, protected, untouchable. I could finally exhale. I started unpacking methodically. Every box I opened carried a memory, a fragment of Ben's life, and each one restored a little more of the house's soul. His books went back onto the shelves, carefully arranged, just as he would have liked. I lingered over each one, tracing the titles with my fingertips, remembering summer afternoons spent reading side by side, his booming laughter echoing in the quiet corners. The half-finished crossword on the coffee table was returned to its place, a small, comforting touch of normalcy. The photograph of me as a 10-year-old, grinning with my missing front tooth, went back on the mantle where it belonged. I could feel Ben's presence everywhere, and it was like reclaiming a part of myself that I hadn't realized had been missing. Even the little things mattered. The collection of sea glass we had gathered together was carefully placed back on the windowsill, catching the sunlight just so, sparkling with color and memory. The hand-carved decoy duck, which had become a symbol of my parents' invasive curiosity, was returned to the shelf where it had always lived. A reminder of the summers spent on the bluff, the quiet mornings, the stories shared. Each act of unpacking felt like a reclaiming, not just of space, but of identity, history, and legacy. The legal victory lingered in the background, a quiet reassurance that my independence was secured. The irrevocable trust had done its job flawlessly. My parents' fraudulent deed was invalid. Their attempts to seize control had failed, and the restraining order was a tangible barrier between their ambitions and my life. For once, I felt untouchable, not invincible, not unfeeling, but legally and morally unassailable. It was a strange, profound relief. I could finally move forward without looking over my shoulder, without anticipating the next manipulation or attack. Sitting in Ben's armchair, looking out at the endless ocean, I allowed myself to reflect on the weeks that had passed. The grief for my uncle was still there, raw and persistent, but mingled now with a strange pride, a quiet triumph. I had navigated treacherous waters, defended what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The emotional roller coaster had been exhausting, terrifying, and yet incredibly clarifying. I had seen my parents for who they truly were, and in doing so, I had found the boundaries I needed to survive and thrive. There was a bittersweet quality to the victory. I had protected the house, preserved Ben's memory, and reclaimed my sanctuary. But in the process, the relationship with my parents had shifted irreparably. The love I had once felt, complicated and sometimes frustrating, had been replaced by a distance that was necessary. Though painful, I had lost them long before this confrontation. But the truth had been undeniable now, and still, in that quiet, reclaimed space, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. The unpacking itself became a meditation, a ritual that grounded me in the present while honoring the past. I moved Ben's favorite armchair back to its rightful place, angled toward the ocean as he had intended. I arranged the books in the same order they had always been, the familiar titles and worn spines a comfort in the aftermath of chaos. I carefully placed photographs and mementos in their spots, creating a rhythm, a pattern that felt like home. Each action, deliberate and slow, reaffirmed my control, my independence, my connection to the life my uncle had cherished and shared with me. As I worked, I realized that the house was more than a gift. It was a testament to Ben's foresight, his understanding of human nature, and his love for me. Even from beyond the grave, he had guided me, armed me with the tools and knowledge to protect what was mine, the trust, the documents, The strategy, it had all been part of a larger lesson in resilience and self-preservation. I had carried it out meticulously, and the results were undeniable. I could feel the weight of history and memory settling around me, anchoring me in a place of safety and comfort. Night fell, and I carried a blanket out to the deck, settling into the familiar rhythm of waves crashing against the bluff. The stars began to emerge, glittering across the sky, mirrored by the subtle shimmer of the ocean below. The peace was profound, almost holy in its simplicity. The house was quiet, the shadows of conflict lifted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt fully present, fully at home. I could reflect, breathe, and simply exist without fear, without intrusion, without the constant tension of anticipation. In that moment, I understood the magnitude of the journey. I had survived betrayal, grief, manipulation, and pressure, and had come out on the other side not only intact, but stronger. The beach house was more than walls and furniture. It was memory and sanctuary and self-discovery. I had learned that boundaries were essential, that love could be complicated, and that resilience often meant standing firm when others expected you to bend. As I watched the stars, I felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons, the victories, and the memories. The house had been a battleground, yes, but it was also a canvas upon which I could reclaim my life. I had unpacked more than boxes. I had unpacked my autonomy, my dignity, and my connection to the past. Ben's gift had been both literal and symbolic: a home, yes, but also the courage and tools to protect it. The night deepened, and the sound of the waves became a lullaby, soothing the frayed edges of recent weeks. I leaned back in the armchair, the blanket draped over my shoulders, and let myself feel the quiet, steady beat of life reclaimed. The confrontation was over. My parents were gone from the house, legally and physically, and I had emerged unbroken. There was a profound, almost sacred peace in that realization. The beach house, Ben's gift, and the life he had trusted me to protect were mine. Truly, fully mine. I stayed there for hours, watching the stars, listening to the waves, letting the emotions settle. There was still sadness, yes, for the loss of my uncle and the fracture with my parents, but it was tempered by triumph, security, and a deep, abiding sense of belonging. I had protected what mattered, honored what had come before, and claimed the life I was meant to live. The house was quiet, my heart steadied, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely, unequivocally at home. And so, that's my story about family, trust, and learning just how strong you can be when everything is on the line. It wasn't easy, and the victory came with its own bittersweet weight, but I finally feel at home, truly and fully. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand your ground or protect something important? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your stories and experiences.